All right. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the first of two Siddur classes with Rabbi Kimelman. Today's shiur is titled Pesukei DeZimra, From Creation to Redemption. What is the function of the four blessings from Psalms 1 Chronicles 29 and Nehemiah 9 in the middle of Pesukei DeZimra? The second session, the Song of the Sea as Liturgy of the Exodus, will be on Sunday, April 6th. Please note that separate registration is not required for that program. So if you're registered for today, you are covered for that as well. Please note that this program is being recorded. Also, everyone is muted, but we welcome questions and comments in the chat, and we'll do our best to address them at the end of the presentation. My name is Noah Gradovsky, and I am a vice president at UTJ. I'd also like to recognize Rabbi Gerald Sussman, our executive vice president, who's here as well. Before we begin, a couple of remarks and notes. Thank you to our sponsors for the webinar, whose names I will be reading in a moment, and I've also pasted into the chat. Those names are our benefactor, Juan Mesa Freidel, in honor of Rabbi Reuven Kimelman, Douglas Hauer in memory of Ruth Gilad, Dr. Yehudi Feldman in recognition of Professor Kimelman, Leslie Apollo, Rabbi Noah Gradovsky, that's me, in honor of everyone who has embraced learning with UTJ through our websites and webinar, Dr. Stuart Hantman, Paul Slater, and David Stanhill. I'd also like to thank everyone who made a donation along with registering for this program. For those of you who are new to UTJ, let me add a few words of introduction about our organization. The Union for Traditional Judaism, UTJ, is a group of rabbis, scholars, and lay people who advocate for a passionate, open-minded approach to Torah study and observance of Jewish law, halakha, rooted in classical religious sources and informed by modern scholarship. Our philosophy is distinguished by the symbiotic relationship between faith in the God-given Torah and intellectual integrity, and our emphasis on the sacred framework of halakha as our unifying guide. Learn more about UTJ at www.utj.org. We are also pleased to be co-sponsoring this program with the Kaplan JCC. The Kaplan JCC on the Palisades is a welcoming home away from home for all who pass through its front doors. Their 185,000 square foot building, plus acres of outside grounds, features 2 fitness centers, an indoor and outdoor aquatic center, group exercise, spin, and Pilates, studios, 2 gymnasiums, tennis and racket courts, indoor track, a luxurious spa, multiple playgrounds and fields, and so much more. The JCC is home to the renowned Thurnauer School of Music, Leonard and Sybil Reuben Early Childhood Center, Neil Klatskin Summer Camp, and the JCC Dance and Drama School. The JCC is proud to offer extensive high-quality programs and services to adults of all ages, as well as to seniors and individuals with special needs. With that, let me introduce our speaker. Rabbi Reuven Kimelman is professor of classical Judaica at Brandeis University and former rabbi of Beth Abraham Sephardic Congregation of New England. He is also scholar in residence at the Kaplan JCC on the Palisades. He specializes in the history of classic Judaism with a focus on the history of poetics of the Jewish liturgy. His latest study is titled The Rhetoric of Jewish Prayer, a historical and literary commentary on the Daily Prayer Book. His other book is The Mystical Meaning of Lecha Dodi and Kabbalat Shabbat. Professor Kimelman's other writings focus on the interaction between Judaism and Christianity, on the ethics of war, and on his mentor, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. And now, with thanks to Professor Kimelman for joining us today, I'll turn it over to Professor Kimelman, and I've put some links to the source material in the chat, and we'll be displaying the source material on screen as well. Rabbi Kimelman.
Thank you, Noah. Today we're going to focus on the part of Pesukei DeZimra that is least understood and least studied. It's the beginning of the second part of Pesukei DeZimra. Pesukei DeZimra is composed of all biblical material, primarily from Psalms. We're going to find out also from the book of Chronicles, Divrei Hayamim, Nehemiah, Shmot, and other verses at the end of prophets. It begins with a blessing called Baruch She'amar and ends with a blessing Yishtabach. These two blessings are encasements of biblical material. All biblical material is cited whole, either whole chapters or whole verses, except for one exception in Yehi Chavod. We're going to focus upon the second part, which comes after the recitation of Psalms 145 to 150, which completes the book of Psalms. So we're going to go to the first page. It begins with a series of 4 brachot at the end of the first half of Pesukei DeZimra. So let's see the first page. It's composed of 4 verses. These 4 verses have a double function. They end the recitation of Psalms 145 to 150, and they begin the second section of Pesukei DeZimra. Now the question is, what are they doing here, and what is their meaning? They achieved the number 4 early on in Ashkenazic liturgy. Ashkenazic liturgy itself is the creator of what we now know as Pesukei DeZimra, primarily disseminated through German Jewry of the 11th and 12th century, which is primarily inspired by the Colonialist family, which came up from Italy. Therefore, Ashkenazic liturgy is based on the liturgy of Italy, which itself be based on the liturgy of ancient Israel. In any case, by the time of the 12th century, it's already found in a manuscript in the Corpus Christi College. The earliest manuscript we have of the Siddur already has these 4 Baruch verses. I say that because there are other versions in Saadia Gaon and in the Geniza, which either have 1 verse, 2 verses, or 4 verses. The recension, which is now practiced almost universally in Judaism, has all 4 verses. What are these 4 verses doing here? The common misunderstanding is that the 4 verses complete the 4 books of Tehillim. The book of Tehillim, the Psalms, is divided into 5 books, probably on the model of the Chumash, having 5 books. Each book is concluded by a Baruch formulary, and since there are 4 Baruch verses here, it was popularly understood that they represent the 4 verses which conclude the book of Psalms, and thus becomes another way of saying we're now completing the whole book of Psalms. Despite the popularity of that interpretation, it has little to do with the reality. If you look on the page in front of you, only 2 of the verses conclude the respective book of Psalms, and they are indicated by the last 2 words, Amen ve'amen. So the opening verse goes, Baruch Adonai le'alam, Amen ve'amen. And that concludes the 3rd book of Psalms. Then we have at the very bottom, Baruch Shem Kavodo le'alam, ve'melech kavodo et ha'aretz, Amen ve'amen. Again, these are concluding verses and indicated by saying Amen ve'amen, which probably was a communal response to the completion of the recitation of one of the book of Psalms. But this explanation has nothing to do with the 2 middle verses, which do not play the role of concluding verses in the book of Psalms. So, for example, the second one is 135:21, and the other one is 72:18 of Psalms. And there are many other verses in the book of Psalms which begin with a Baruch formulary, Baruch something. So the question is, why are these 4 chosen? Why are they here? So one way of answering a question, explaining a verse, is asking the question, what is the verse answering? So if you look at the opening verse, Baruch Adonai Le'olam Amen V'Amen, the word Le'olam answers the question, when? When is God blessed? And the answer is, God is blessed for all time. Le'olam. That's not unusual, but the biblical focus starts with time. Frequently, the biblical focus moves from time to space. A very similar phenomenon exists right here. The second verse goes, Baruch Adonai Mitzion, Shachen Yerushalayim, Hallelujah. So it answers the question, where is God blessed? Just like the opening line answers the question, when is God blessed? Then we go to the third one. What's the third one? The third one says, the third one says, Baruch Adonai Elohim, Elohei Yisrael, Oseh Niflot Levado. So what's the added element here? Oseh Niflot Levado. So it answers the question, why is God blessed? Now we move to the fourth, and we see a remarkable phenomenon, because frequently the end of a prayer serves to summarize the prayer. So the fourth verse, which you can see on your screen almost, says, Baruch Shem Kvodo Le'olam V'Yimale Kvodo Et Ka'aretz Amen V'Amen. So this verse answers two questions. First, the fourth word says Le'olam, which reminds you of the first line, in which the third word is also Le'olam. So it answers the question with regard to time. Then it says, V'Yimale Kvodo Et Ka'aretz Amen V'Amen. We move from time to space. Not only is it time to space, it's all of time and all of space. So the last verse is eternal and universal. Thus, it functions as a summary verse, because the opening verse refers to time, Le'olam. The second verse refers to space, Shachen Yerushalayim. The fourth verse refers to both, Baruch Shem Kvodo Le'olam, V'Yamalech Kvodo Ka'aretz, Amen V'Amen. There refers both to what? Both time and space. What's remarkable, though, since it's a summary verse, space has been expanded. In line 2, space is limited to Yerushalayim. Where is God blessed? Mitzion, Shachen Yerushalayim, Hallelujah. But by verse 4, it's no longer Mitzion, it's V'Yamalei, Kvodo, Ekaretz, Amen V'Amen. So it's remarkable that these 4 verses answer 4 questions. The first one is, when? Baruch Adonai Le'olam Amen V'Amen. The second is, where? Baruch Adonai Mitzion, Shachen Yerushalayim, Hallelujah. The third is, why? Baruch Adonai Elohim, Elohei Yisrael, Oseh Niflot Levado. And the last one includes both space and time, and expands space to the whole wide world. Baruch Shem Kvodo Le'olam V'Yamalech Kvodo Et Ka'aretz, Amen V'Amen. So these 4 verses function to summarize the book of Psalms by answering the questions that the Psalms raise. Where is God to be blessed? Now, what's remarkable is, what's it doing here? And why was it chosen this mode to end the recitation of Psalms? To which the one answer I just gave you, space and time. But now let's look below the page, and we'll see that it corresponds to the beginning of Pesukei DeZimra. Pesukei DeZimra, which it begins with the phrase Baruch Shamar, is also a series of verses which are lines which begin the word Baruch. Baruch Shamar Vayalam. Baruch Hu. Then we have number 2, Baruch Oseh V'Reshit. Baruch Omer V'Yoseh. Baruch Ozem Kayim. So the first 2 lines refer back to creation. Then line 3 says, Baruch Merachem Al Aretz. Baruch Merachem Al Abriot. Baruch Meshaim Schar Tov V'Re'av. We have three Baruchs, all referring to the topic of providence, how God treats the world. Then we move Baruch Podeh Matzil, the idea of redemption. He redeems and saves. And then look at the next part, quite remarkable. We go back to the theme of eternity. Back on the theme of eternity, after 4. Let's see if we can see it. Okay. There it says, Baruch Chai La'ad V'Kayim L'Netzach Baruch Shemo. So we could argue that just like Pesukei DeZimra begins with a series of Baruch, 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 it ends this part with a series Baruch, 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 Baruch 4 times. And therefore we have the liturgical structure of Chatimatam Me'ein Petichatan, called an envelope structure, in which the in recapitulates the nature of the beginning. So this would give 2 explanations. One is it answers the question, when, where, why, then where again, would be one explanation. A complementary explanation is it liturgically completes the part of the liturgy which begins with Baruch, 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 and therefore ends with Baruch, Baruch, Baruch. And since we said the book of Psalms, all the Baruch verses are taken from the book of Psalms. That's 2 explanations. It turns out that there's a 3rd explanation. So let's read on. Go down the page. Okay, here you have when, where, why, and concluding when and where. Now this function means it completes what was just said. But it also acts as a transition part, leading into what is about to be said. So let's move down a bit, because these 4 verses introduce a selection from Chronicles, Divrei Yamim, chapter 29, verses 10 to 13. There it says, Vayavarech David et Adonai lekol kahal. David blessed, as it were, in the presence of God, the whole congregation. Then he said, Vayomer David, Baruch Ata Adonai Elahei Yisrael Avinu me'alam va'ad olam. And then it goes through several lines, all from Divrei Yamim. My point is to underscore the color of it. It turns out that the 4 verses from Psalms at the top of the page, the purple elements, reappear in the selection from Divrei Yamim Chronicles. Therefore, the choice of verses not only concludes the first half of Pesukei DeZimra, the choice of verses also transition into the second half. So we have the word le'olam appearing in both. Look at the purple. We have Elokei Yisrael appearing in both. We have reference to shame, kavod, le'olam, and kol haaretz. So you can see just by the purple coloring that these 4 verses have a multi-function. They serve to conclude the recitation of Psalms. They answer the questions when, where, why, when, and where. They also complete that which begins with Baruch She'amar. And they also transition into the following section of Divrei HaYamim. Now, originally, this section for Divrei HaYamim 1 Chronicles was the end of Pesukei DeZimra. And the last line was, Vata, look at the last line, Eloheinu modim anachnu lach, umalim l'shem tifartecha. And this is where the service ended, probably about the 10th or 11th century. So when they said, Vata Eloheinu modim anachnu lach, umalim l'shem tifartecha, of course, when you see the modim anachnu lach, it alludes probably now to the Amidah, in which the 3rd section of the Amidah begins with modim anachnu lach. And then we have the word Mehalim l'shem tifartecha. We're going to praise your name, tifartecha, either your glory, your beauty, or your majesty. It's a multifunctional word. Now, originally, when we vended Shem tifartecha, they jumped to Yishtabach. That was the original idea. And that's already found in the Rambam. We don't do that anymore because now we insert the Az Yashir. We insert the Az Yashir because the scholars and Hasidim of German Jewry of the 11th and 12th century, Hasidic Ashkenaz, argued that Pesukei DeZimra is an official service and therefore begins with a Baruch formulary and ends with a Baruch formulary, and all the biblical selections should be contained therein. The result was that the Az Yashir, which was one time after Yishtabach, and there its function was to introduce the Shema liturgy, because the Az Yashir ends Adonai Yimloch Le'alam Va'ed. It was understood by Chazal when you say Adonai Yimloch Le'alam Va'ed, there was an act of Kabbalat Ol Malchut Shamayim, of acceptance of divine sovereignty, and that biblical section therefore was used to introduce the Kriyat Shema liturgy, whose goal also is Kabbalat Ol Malchut Shamayim, the acceptance of divine sovereignty. That was where the Nusach was, and that's how it's still in the Nusach of the Rambam. But already by the 12th, maybe even the 11th century, Hasidic Ashkenaz argued that all the biblical selections, even Az Yashir, should be contained between Baruch She'amar and Yishtabach. So originally, Mahalim L'Shem Tifartecha, the last line of Chronicles, introduced the Yishtabach. So instead of saying Mahalim L'Shem Tifartecha, which is in biblical Hebrew, Yishtabach begins Yishtabach Shemcha La'ad Malkeinu. So you have the word Shem, and the word Mahalim, the synonym for Mahalim is Yishtabach, and the word Shem is there. So this verse was a transition verse from the biblical material to the concluding blessing of Pesukei DeZimra, which we call Yishtabach by virtue of its first name. Now, Hasidic Ashkenaz argued that the Az Yashir should be inserted before Yishtabach. So this raised the issue, how do we bridge the original service of Chronicles 1, 29, 10, 13 to Az Yashir? So let's move down and let's see what happens here. Okay, first we should note the formula. In Chronicles, we have the following language. Baruch atah Hashem Elokei Yisrael Avinu me'olam va'ad olam. This is the verse which is most like the rabbinic bracha formulary. The rabbinic bracha formulary, which we all know, said about 100 times a day, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech ha'olam, is not found in the Tanakh. The verse closest to it is found in Chronicles. There you can find it almost identical with one development. Baruch atah Hashem is the first three words of both. The Chronicle verse says Elokei Yisrael Avinu, and that is summarized in the bracha by the word Elokeinu. That is the God of Israel, our Father. We just say what? Our God. Now, the last three words in Chronicles are Me'olam V'ad Olam, which in the bracha says Melech HaOlam. Now, this is quite remarkable, because Me'olam V'ad Olam are temporal. So Me'olam V'ad Olam really means from the beginning of time until the end of time. Now, what does the phrase Melech HaOlam mean? HaOlam, in biblical Hebrew, almost always refers to time. In rabbinic Hebrew, it mostly refers to space. So we translate Melech HaOlam, king of the world, or sovereign of the universe. But words which take on new meanings rarely lose their old meanings. And therefore, sometimes in rabbinic Hebrew, Ha'olam refers back to time. In medieval poetry, Ha'olam frequently refers to time. So we say the prayer Adon Olam Asher Malach should be translated as eternal master. Therefore, Melech HaOlam probably should be translated as master of time and space. The function of the phrase Olam is totality. It can be the totality of space, therefore translated as universe. It can be the totality of time, therefore translated as eternity. In any case, the real chidush of the verse is the insertion of the word melech. Just like Kriyat Shema is Kabbalat O Malchut Shemayim, the Shema transition from a focus upon God's oneness or onlyness or uniqueness, Hashem Echad, into a focus on God's sovereignty. So we say Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, and we call it Kabbalat O Malchut Shemayim. To make sure that we capture it properly, we inserted an explanation. Baruch Shem Kvodo Umalchuto. Therefore, Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. So this line in Chronicles is the source of the rabbinic blessing, but the rabbinic blessing goes one step forward by emphasizing Melech HaOlam. We accept God's sovereignty, and therefore the bracha formulary parallels the Shema formulary. Both of them have 6 words. Both of them have Hashem Elokeinu as the middle, 3rd, and 4th word. But let's go on to the bottom of the page here. The next page here. Now we're going to see something quite remarkable. Vayavorech David is the biblical selection. It was followed by Yishtabach. So Yishtabach serves to summarize the material from Baruch Shamar up to Yishtabach, according to the classical liturgy. So it leaves out any reference or the explicit reference to the Az Yashir. But you can see from the chart in front of you by the color blue, all the terms that appear in Vayavorech David reappear in Yishtabach, because the function of the Yishtabach is to summarize what was said previously. What was said previously were biblical selections. Yishtabach is a later blessing, but you see the word Vayivarech David. Then you have Arolam, so we have Yishtabach Shimcha La'ad. We have the word Malkeinu and Melech because Hamamlacha appears in Vayivarech David in the color yellow. I made it separately only because the theme of God's sovereignty sets the tone for the upcoming Shema Uvirchateha. But then we have Shemayim Va'aretz in both. Look at the blue. Then look at the blue in line 3 of the above of Vayivarech David. Line 4, excuse me. We've also Shemayim Va'aretz. Then we have Lecha Hashem Kichol. We have Kilecha Na'eh Hashem Elokeinu. Same expression. Now even more remarkable, make it even smaller so we can see more of the page. All the words which begin in the middle of Yishtabach, we have Halel, line 3, Ozem Emshalah, line 4, Netzach, line 5, line 6 is Gedula Gvura, Tila V'Tiferet. These words all appear in Vayivarech David. So the function of the Yishtabach is the reformulation of the Vayivarech David in a manner which rhymes. You can see the rhyme scheme. For example, look at 2. Shir Ushvacha. Next. Halel V'Zimra. 4. Oza Memshala. You say Shvacha, Zimra, Memshala. Then we have Netzach. Netzach is a very strange word. Some people translate triumph, like Linatseach in a Milchama. Others use the word eternity, as it says, Linatzach. Some people think it's even a musical term, Lamnatseach. In any case, in light of the context here, it has to go with the 2 previous terms, Ozu Memshala, Gedula Gvura. Therefore, probably means triumph or victory, because lines 4 and line 6 are all statements of strength. In any case, the words line 7, Tila V'Tiferet, Then line 8 is remarkable because the word Kedusha does not appear in Pesukei DeZimra. The closest thing we have is Varech Shem Kacho Le'elam Va'ed at the end of the Ashrei. So the Kedusha Machut is probably inserted here to introduce the Yishtabach functions as the introduction of Kriyat Shema Virchataha, and therefore the two major themes in the Kriyat Shema is Kadosh, 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 the verse from Srafim of the first bracha, and Kabbalat Ol Machut Shemayim of the Shema. So line 8, Kedusha Machut, introduces the upcoming Shema. Therefore, the Yishtabach performs a wonderful function. It summarizes what precedes and introduces what's about to come. It anticipates their coming. It's kind of Janus face. It faces backwards and summarizes, faces forward, anticipates, and introduces. Now go down to the line 9. It says, Brachot Vodot, Me'atav Yaralam. All these expressions are taken from the Vayevorech David. Now go down to the bottom of the page. Okay, and we conclude by saying, Baruch atah Hashem, El Melech Gadol B'Tishbachot. Then we have El HaHodot, which goes back to line 9 of the middle of the bracha, Hodaot, Adon Nifrod. And we end by line 4, Habocher B'Shirei Zimra, again, Melech, El, Cheholamim. So we have two themes, God being sovereign and God being eternal. So these two themes, God's sovereignty and God's eternality or eternity, is the last line of the Yishtabach, and the same words appear in the Yishtabach. So the last two lines on the page emphasize the correlation between the two. So Yishtabach at the bottom of the page says, Oz Memshalah, Netzach Gedula Gevura. Now look at the last line. Vayevorech David. Almost all those words appear at the beginning. We have Gvura, Gedula. Instead of Oz, we now have Netzach. Now instead of Memshalah, it goes on and say Ata Moshe Bako. Now what you at the bottom, it's at the very end, it says Umalim L'Shem Tifartecha. They bless your majestic name. So what do you have in Yishtabach? Instead of Mahalim, you have the noun form, Tehillah. Instead of Tifartecha, you have the word Tiferet. So we see that Yishtabach reformulates the phraseology of Yevorech David, and originally came in its footsteps. So people said Vayevorech David, that section from Chronicles. Then they had the concluding blessing, Yishtabach, which significantly reformulates Vayevorech David, while simultaneously introducing Kriyat Shema Virchataha, whose theme is God's Malchut, while simultaneously referring back to Vayevorech David with its reference also to God's kingship, Mamlacha. Now we have the following question. The question is, how do we end Vayevorech David now and jump to Az Yashir? Because Chassidei Ashkenaz demanded that Az Yashir precede the Yishtabach. The trouble is that the section Vayevorech David seems to have nothing to do with Az Yashir. Therefore, the break between the two is obvious, making the transition very difficult. So what did Chassidei Ashkenaz do? They did something quite brilliant. Now look at the next page. What they did is, they said, they have here again, Nehemiah, it's Nehemiah chapter 9, 6 to 11. And I put at the top of the page the second half of verse 9, because some Sidurim include that verse, although most begin with Nehemiah 9, 6, 11, Vayevorech David. I made a mistake. I referred to this as Chronicles, but now you'll see the difference. So what they did was, after they finished Vayevorech David, they inserted a section from Chronicles, chapter 29, verses 10 to 13. Why was this section inserted? So let's look at its content and see if we can figure out the reason. Now let's see if we can see the whole thing. 1 Chronicles 29, 10, 13. Okay, now, this is an amazing section because it's the first effort to try to summarize biblical history. So the question is, if you were going to summarize biblical history of the whole book of Genesis, what would you emphasize? Could you reduce the book of Breshit to about 10 lines? And if you could, what would you focus on? So this section from Divrei Yamim starts off, Ata Hashem levadecha. You, a God, alone are God. Now that is a wonderful opening line for a liturgy which is going to move into the Shema, because most medieval commentators understood Hashem Echad as Hu Levado. That is, God is unique, there's only one God, and there's nothing like him or like her. So the opening line says, Ata Hashem Levadecha, which of course is also the primary message of chapter 1 of Genesis. Genesis 1 is trying to convince you that the world is so well constructed and the world emerged from chaos to cosmos. And since it's so well constructed, there must be a single constructor. And therefore, the argument for design is derived in chapter 1 of Genesis. And the conclusion of chapter 1 of Genesis is Atahu Adonai Levadecha. And then it goes on to summarize the creation. Ata Asita Tashamayim. Shemei Hashamayim V'chotzavam. So, Breshit bara Elokim et Hashamayim v'Haaretz. So it follows the order of the opening verse of Breshit. First Shamayim, then Haaretz. So the line says, Ata Asita et Hashamayim, Ushmei Hashamayim v'chotzavam. Then Haaretz, line 3. Haaretz v'chol asher leha, hamim v'chol asher bahem. This summarizes the first opening days. We have heaven, we have land, we have sea. Then, verse 4, Ata mechaya kulam, utzvach hashamayim lecha mishachavim. You give life or create them all, and everybody bows down to God. So this line is kind of added as a part of liturgy. Then, remarkably, it jumps from creation to Avraham. The topic is election. And here is the only place where Avraham was chosen out, the word chosen. So the Moses says, Ata hu Adonai Elohim asher bacharta b'Avraham. So again, you are the Lord our God who elected Abraham, bacharta. And what did you do? Hotseito mior kasdim. Now this is remarkable. Hotseito mior kasdim. The word hotseito does not appear in Breshit with regard to Avraham, but hotseito does appear in Exodus. And the Exodus is called Yetziat Mitzrayim. So the word hotseito creates the illusion that the Exodus of Avraham from Haran or Bavel to Eretz Yisrael anticipates the Exodus of Am Yisrael from Mitzrayim to Eretz Yisrael. All this contained by using the word hotseito. I borrow a term from the Exodus, I apply it to Avraham. By saying hotseito, as it were, Abraham becomes the model of the first one to exit the Exodus. And where did you take him out? Miur Kasdim. V'samta shmo Avraham. Next thing you did what? You changed his name from Avraham to Avraham. And then, Matzata uvavona me'am lefanecha, referring to chapter 14, where Abraham trusts God's promise that he will have many descendants. So there was a ne'am lefanecha. Then the next event is you made a covenant with Avraham. You gave him the land, and the land you gave to him, which was the land of the Canaanite, Hachiti, Emori, Perizi, Yevusi, was also given to his descendants. Letech lezaro. So that's us. Then it says, you kept your word, for you are righteous. Now, here's remarkable. From creation to the election of Abraham to the gift of the land, the next move in this prayer from Chronicles goes to Yetzias Mitzrayim, to the Exodus. There it says, Vatere et ani avotenu, you saw the suffering, and the word ani, or anyan, vayanunu, is a key word. It uses frequently to summarize the oppression of Egypt. So you saw the oppression of our fathers in Egypt, v'zakatam, v'shavatam, and their outcry, says Exodus, you heard. So now we have the similar, all this refers to what? Exodus. Vatitein otot moftim, v'faro, v'cho avadav, v'cho marzo. The summary is, the wonders, otot moftim refers to the makot, afflicted Paro, his servants, and the whole people and its land. Then kiyadata kiyazidolim. The reason you do this is that they were mezidim. Mezidim, zadu alehem, they were the perpetrators of evil. Vatasacha shem kayom, and by doing these miracles, you made a great name for yourself, which goes back to the second to the last plague, where God says to Pharaoh, I could have done away with you, but I kept you around so you will testify and proclaim to the world what I've done here. Meaning that the makot are not punishment for Pharaoh. They are examples to display God's power. And therefore, his heart had to be hardened to resist it, to allow for a greater display of God's power in order to convince not only the Israelites, not only the Egyptians, not only the whole wide world, but make it so memorable that people will tell future generations. Now look at the very last line. It says, Vayam bakata lifnehem, vayavru betoch hayam u'yabasha. Now we use the phrase kriyat yamsuf because we know it from the from the song on Pesach, Dayenu. But the original biblical expression is bakata, bakiyat yamsuf. Hayam bakat lifnehem, and then vayavru betoch hayam v'yabasha, and they went through the water and got to the dry land. Then it says, et rofehem hishlachta b'msalot kamo even b'mayim azim, the last line. Now this is playing upon a verse in Az Yashir, which we discuss in the next section. But that verse there says, erdof, asig, achalek, shalal, timelema nafshi, ori, charabi, torishem yadi. Then it says, nashafta burchacha, kisamo, and they went down like tzalalu v'mayim adirim. So all those words are contained here. Et rodfehem, erdof. V'imsalot, it says, tzalalu. Instead of saying mayim adirim, they say mayim azim, meaning that last line reformulates the verse of the Song of the Sea, and therefore it's going to introduce the Song of the Sea. And in order to make the introduction even more explicit, we add to this part Exodus 14, 30, 31, the verses which come right before Az Yashir. So let's look at them now. It says, Vayosh Adonai Vayamahu Et Yisrael Miyad Mitzrayim. So in the opening line, we have three factors. We have God, we have Israel, and we have Egypt. Now the question of the three, which is the dominant one? So let's look at the next verse. Vaya Yisrael Mitzrayim Meit Asfatayam. What appears here? Yisrael appears again, and Mitzrayim appears again. So now they're equal. Now look at the third verse. Vaya Yisrael Yagadala Asher Asadana Mitzrayim. Now we have Yisrael and Mitzrayim and God. Again, just like the opening line, all three factors: Israel, God, Egypt. So at the moment, Israel appears three times, as does God, as does Egypt. Now comes the concluding line, line 4. Vayira ha'am et Adonai Vayamina Badanai Moshe Avdo. We have the what? The people, Israel, and we have Hashem, and the concluding line, who disappears totally? Egypt. What's the conclusion? Vayiru. Now, the word Vayiru is very difficult. Almost anybody reading this the first time would translate, they saw, because you have Vayar, Vayiru. You wouldn't think it's anything more than they saw. But then it says they saw God. For those who believe you cannot see God, they suddenly realize that we have to translate Vayar, not from seeing, but from Yirah, to revere. And therefore parallels Vayaminu. So instead of saying seeing is believing, here revering leads to believing. So Vayiru, now the reason I emphasize this, because I don't think anybody would catch this on the first round. And therefore the verse is formulated to make you read it a second time. And you have to revise your original understanding. Your original understanding is Vayiru is they saw. Then you realize it's not they saw, but they revered. And the result is Vayamina Bashem Moshe Avdo. Now this is remarkable. Why? Because the way it appears in Pesukei DeZimra, we quote the section from Chronicles, which goes up to the crossing of the sea. Now, if you look at Chronicles, it continues on with biblical history, but they cut it here because the function of this is to introduce the Az Yashir. And then they inserted the verses from Exodus, which end the chapter before Az Yashir. Az Yashir is chapter 15. And this is chapter 14. So what Hasidei Ashkenaz did is they created a link between Vayavarech David and Az Yashir by quoting a section of Chronicles which fits perfectly. That is, it begins with creation, moves to Avraham, and the way the selection ends concludes with the Exodus. Thus, we're using Chronicles now, which originally came after the Exodus to summarize it. It liturgically now introduces the Exodus. So this section was inserted into Pesukei DeZimra to create a bridge between Vayavarech David and the requirement of saying Az Yashir now before Yishtabach. When Az Yashir came after Yishtabach, we didn't need the transition because the Az Yashir ended Adonai Yimloch Ram Va'ed, and therefore serves as a perfect introduction to Kriyat Shema V'Chateha because of the common theme of Kabbalat Ol Malchut Shamayim. But in Pesukei DeZimra, we have to get to Az Yashir Vayivarech David. So what did we do? We inserted a section from Divrei Hayamim, which starts with creation, which is a major theme of the Psalms of Pesukei DeZimra, and ends with Az Yashir, that is, the crossing of the sea and the drowning of the Egyptians. And therefore the transition is so smooth that most people don't know that you're reading three different biblical selections. That is, Nehemiah, Divrei Hayamim, and Shmot. It reads so smoothly, and since many Sidurim do not put a break between the two, most people think they're reading one section of the Tanakh, not knowing that they're reading three sections of the Tanakh, and the composition, what I call composition by juxtaposition. That is, we create a liturgical selection by juxtaposing different sections of the Tanakh, and we create one line or history line. So here we have Vayivarech David, then we have the Chronicles, then we have Exodus, and it reads so smoothly that if I didn't give the sources here and outline them, most people say Pesukei DeZimra think it's all one section, which just shows you how beautifully the Siddur is constructed. And while Pesukei DeZimra, it looks like material thrown together, it's quite evident upon understanding that it's woven together, and the texture creates a beautiful liturgical garment. Okay, that concludes our discussion of the beginning of the second section of Pesukei DeZimra, from the first opening 4 brachot verses, and concluding with introduction to Az Yashir, which introduce what we'll be doing next section in understanding Az Yashir as also a liturgy, just like we did on these 3 sections. Okay, we have a couple more minutes. We want to allow for questions, responses, or comments. Do you have any questions, comments? No. What I like to do frequently.
I have a question.
Sorry about that, Rabbi Kimelman. Yeah, okay, please.
Okay. Can I ask a question?
Yes, you may. Absolutely. Sorry about that.
You said at the very beginning that this whole idea of Pesukei DeZimra bracketed by a bracha before and a bracha at the end of it was first introduced in Ashkenazic Europe. But my Siddur of Rav Saadia Gaon already offers it as an option with the bracha before and after. So that means it already was around. Saadia doesn't make it mandatory, but he does say it's a good idea to do it. And he certainly knows of that framework.
No, thank you for that clarification. What I meant to say was that all the biblical material is contained in the opening and closing blessing. So after Yishtabach, there's nothing intervening between that and the Baruch Hu and the Shema. Originally, the Az Yashir was after Yishtabach, and now it's before Yishtabach. So the liturgical unit meaning, we have a bracha beforehand, a bracha afterwards, and everything before the Shema is contained therein.
Thank you. I didn't get that straight at the beginning.
Thank you for
a good question.
Let me clarify it.
Some questions were posted at times where then sometimes you then followed up, and I think you provided an answer just through your natural delivery and exposition. But Sarah had asked a question about why the need to repeat Yishtabach in Vayvarech. Was it for people who may have arrived late? Is it to create some kind of synergy?
How do you hear the word? What's the need for? What was the word?
Well, the requirement, like if Yishtabach is summarizing and capturing a lot of Vayvarech David, then as well as obviously being a preview into Brechot Shema, why the need at all to say Vayvarech? Like you explained why Vayvarech was necessary, but then it seems like Yishtabach captures most of those key elements.
Oh, so the question is, why do you varech at all at the beginning?
Exactly.
Okay, that is an interesting question. We don't really know the answer to that question. We already know it's part of the early part of the liturgy, original transition. But I wouldn't be surprised is Vayavarech David, because you just said 4 brachot from Tehillim. So now we're going to quote David himself, Vayavarech David. So this is a theme is Tehillim, and the word is bracha. Get it? And the phrases there, almost all of them are praises of God. Get it? It functions like a summary of all the Psalms we said. And therefore we're summarizing all the terms of praise of God, which the Vayavarech is replete with. And therefore functions originally as the completion of the biblical sections, followed by Yishtabach.
Mm-hmm. When you're showing, here's another question. When you were showing it's a beautiful bookend, Baruch Hashem Le'olam Amen V'Amen, is in a way a bookend to Baruch She'amar. And the question is, Baruch She'amar does have kind of the classical structure of a bracha, Baruch Hashem, in the second half of it. Do we look at Baruch Hashem Le'olam as a bracha of sorts, even though it lacks the framing of Baruch Atah Hashem?
Yes, there are early commentators who argue that the function of these Baruch verses is to conclude the first half of the Psalms. So you're reading the book of Psalms from 145 to 150, plus Yehi Chavod, and it begins with Baruch She'amar, which is a proem originally only said in Shabbat. But the real bracha begins with the bracha formula, Baruch Atah Hashem. And since you begin with the Baruch formulary, you conclude with Baruch formulary. And therefore, the original Baruch verses were acting as a conclusion of saying of Psalms. So what do you do when you say Psalms? You begin with the bracha, and you conclude with the bracha. By a bracha, I mean nothing more than a line which begins with the word Baruch. That's the biblical formula, which is multi-form. In rabbinic times, it became formulated into a formulated 6-word prescribed formula. That's much later. We don't have the bracha formula that we know from Chazal appear in the Bible, but we have something externally close to it.
This is a question that actually a couple of people asked in different formulations, but that is just the normative way of how we daven. Pesukei DeZimra is rushed through. One person notes that Rav Heschel had commented that it's better to say a little with great kavanah than to say a lot just to be Makayim, saying everything. What's your personal opinion of how we should be positing the sense of our morning days and moving forward, as well as obviously having proper kavanah? Are we better saying less with more kavanah, ideally? Or obviously the best would be to say it all with kavanah. What's your own personal opinion?
Anyhow, the citation you made from Moreno of Rabbeinu Rabbi Heschel is found in the Tur Shulchan Aruch.
Yep.
Mat b'chavana. Now, it is clear to me that there are way too many words there. And in Shabbat, it's double. Sometimes it's triple if you add it. If you add the Shir HaMa'alot. So either you can take about 2 hours to get there and say everything closely. What I did for many years, although don't say this publicly, I'm sure you can keep a secret, but I'm fearful the people you tell will not be able to keep it.
YouTube videos are really great at keeping things secret.
Yeah, I said every other one.
Turn off the recorder.
Every other one, but to slow it down, because as soon as I focused my attention on it, the Chazan was already to the next one, and it became what is called the leprosy of fluency, an expression attributed to Martin Buber. That we say some things over and over again, it's very difficult to focus your attention upon them. So it's worth slowing down. I would say from Psalm 145, I would say 145, then 147, 149, then 150, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And then Tuesday and Thursday, I would say the ones I left out and then complete the whole thing, because I found it way beyond what I could keep up with the Chazan if I started focusing attention. Now, our Siddur got larger and larger and larger. And as it got larger and larger and larger, everybody had good intentions, but the result is people come later and later to shul. So most rabbis think that people come to shul late because they count time from the beginning. But most people count time from the end. So they come to shul and say, I will give an hour to shul. So they come the last hour, which means they missed the whole Shema service. When I was a rabbi, I was amazed at how many people came in on Rosh Hashanah and were very careful to hear Tkiyat Shofar, but they missed the main thing of Kriyat Shema V'Chataha because it came so late. But the reason it came so late is because we rabbis consistently extended the service. So as it got later and later, they gave their 1 hour, hitting less and less. So I would say, following the tour, he says, much better ma'at b'chavana mi'asher harbe b'lo chavana. Now, once it's done, though, you can then concentrate and say the whole thing, but it takes a long time to internalize it. So my practice for years was to do every other, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, to the others, Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday. And thus I completed the whole thing and began focusing attention. And once I started focusing attention, I began to realize what I didn't understand. I decided to write a book on the Siddur.
Fantastic. Thank you. We have a question from Shoshana. And I'm going to confess I don't fully understand the direction of this. I'm going to ask her to mute, but just to start her off, just how confident are we that the Siddur of Rav Tzadok Gaon is genuinely Gaonic? Shoshana, if you want to just maybe elaborate.
Yeah,
I see you just muted.
that was in a response to the conversation about when about Rambam and when
Okay.
there were
The timing.
changes made in the position of Azishir, because I know that with Seder Rav Amram, there's a lot of doubt that the manuscripts we have haven't been corrected by scribes, and I don't know really in terms of Sadja if that's the same situation. That's the
So the
question.
accuracy of the dating of the manuscripts and the authorship of it.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's
so
that's
Okay.
what my question's about.
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
yeah, where Amram Gaon is hardly usable by an historian. Where Amram
Right.
Gaon's Sidur was copied and copied and copied. When people copied in the Middle Ages, they did not copy for antiquarian interests. They copied a manuscript to use it. Therefore, when they copied a manuscript, it is always updated. Therefore, the things in Amram Gaon, which go from the 9th up to the late as the 14th century, you don't know. There's also two different recensions of it. Therefore, the only way you know something was earlier of Amram Gaon is if it's cited by earlier authorities, like the Manhig and the Sefer Eshkol. If they cite
Yeah.
it, then you know what it was. So it's not dependable historically. Now, Reb Saadia Gaon, I think, has 4 manuscripts. A man recently had a Hebrew University, or Bar Ilan, I forget which one, wrote a doctorate on it and gives all the manuscript renditions. The advantage of Sidur Reb Saadia Gaon is 2. Number 1, it wasn't copied a lot because it was lost. So therefore, we're closer to the original. 2, we have a text plus commentary. So while the text can sometimes be updated, the commentary is not. Therefore, anything which appears in the commentary is evidence it comes originally from Saadia Gaon. If the text differs from the commentary, there's a good chance the text has been updated. So just to give you an example, in the 1890s, they published a Sidur of Ramosha Cordovero, the Ramak. The Sidur is totally unreliable because it was updated so people could use it in the 1890s. What is reliable is the commentary that comes from Ramosha Cordovero. So if you find something in the commentary, it goes back to, let's say, 1570 or so, or maybe a decade or two earlier. If it's only in the text and not in the commentary and reflects later Sidurim, it's been updated so that the people who put it out could sell it and make it usable for synagogue services.
Okay. Thank you.
I want to ask a question to conclude, if no one has another question. That is, in light of the presentation, what did you find most surprising?
I'll just say for me personally, then I apologize, I have to hop off. I think just how impactful Baruch Hashem Amen V'Amen. And I always kind of thought of it more as just a lovely wrap, the Hallelujahs and the end of Tehillim. I never really made a connection between it and Baruch She'amar. I always thought of Yishtabach being the natural bookend of Pesukei DeZimra, Baruch She'amar, as well as kind of an introduction to Berchot Kriyas Shema.
Okay, yeah, I imagine many people thought what you think.
Right. Which is why we're usually wrong. Don't follow the masses. We're half right. We'll just open up the lines. Anyone who wants to pipe in, what did you draw from this wonderful shir?
So, as a person with a physics background, the time-space relationship is very fascinating to me, and I never really understood when it was time and when it was space, when it's both. And so I really appreciated the explanation about biblical Hebrew versus rabbinic Hebrew. Thank you.
I would tell you, by the way, if you're interested in physics, the integration of time and space is one of the major contributions of Kabbalistic thinking.
Right.
In other words, time and space are really two dimensions of the same thing. We think them separately because our mind works that way, said Immanuel Kant. But in actuality, they're two dimensions of the same thing. Therefore, we can use spatial terms to refer to temporal realities, and temporal terms to refer to spatial realities. In fact, all of L'chad Dodi is based upon that interaction between the two.
Einstein was more Jewish than he thought.
Could be. Many of us are that way.
Some people have mentioned that they were surprised by the order in terms of the Azishir originally following Yishtabach versus preceding it, and why the change in moving it before Yishtabach.
Is that formulated as a question or expression of
Oh
surprise?
no, I mean just saying in terms of when you asked like
Yeah.
among the learnings,
Right.
a couple
Yeah.
people typed that in.
Right.
I do apologize. I have to hop, but some people had asked if we could save um, the questions and comments. I'm actually just highlighting that. I'm going to paste it and forward it to Noah, and I'll leave it for Noah and also Rabbi Kimelman. And maybe if there's a way to circulate or share it. This was wonderful. Thank you very much. I have to hop for we have to head to another meeting, but we'll keep it going as long as some people.
I
As long
have
as
one little comment, and this is not about the topic, but something which I realized in the presentation of it as a historical realization. In that, this material and a lot kind of was transported from Eretz Yisrael to Ashkenaz, and it underlines the historical role of Ashkenaz as one of the original Jewish communities, which we usually give the Sephardim more authenticity. And we see from this that geographically, the background of Ashkenaz Jewry and its origins is directly Eretz Yisrael. So again, that feeds into the whole thing about Ashkenazi Jews as European colonialists and all of that. Rather than that, the Ashkenazim are descendants of the pre-Islamic population of Eretz Yisrael. And we shouldn't really particularly assign that to Sephardim. That's kind of what I thought.
Culturally speaking, Spain, the Islamic Empire, was under the influence of the Gaonim of Baghdad. That was one empire. Eretz Yisrael is very close to the heel of Italy. And southern Eretz Yisrael was part of the Byzantine community, outside of the Islamic Empire for much time, which is why in southern Italy Jews also knew Greek, and therefore knew much of the Apocrypha, which was not in the Hebrew Bible. Anyhow, culture went up Italy, and the colonialist family, by the 1000s, brought it to Europe into three main communities called Shum, Speyer, Magenza, and Varmaiza. And they liturgically were the most productive liturgical community. Much of our liturgy is due to them. More than any other single community, Hasidic Ashkenaz were the formulators of our liturgy, primarily Pesukei DeZimra. The creation we now know as Pesukei DeZimra is significantly their creation, or their completion. The word creation is improper here, but their completion and embellishment, yes. I will leave the politics to another conversation.
I'll say that oh, sorry. I'll say what surprised me the most was the bit about Hotzeto Avram as like foreshadowing or calling forward to the Exodus.
Yeah, that's remarkable. Yeah, the choice of language there. Generally, the choice of biblical language is quite resonant. And if you can hear the echoes, it clearly enriches its understanding.
Right. Let me formally wrap up. If people want to continue to discuss, I'm more than happy to keep the Zoom open for a bit. Let me begin the wrap up by, as always, thanking Rabbi Kimelman for his enlightening presentation. And I think Mitch had to go already, but I wanted to thank him for working with me on these webinars and particularly doing a really great job of synthesizing the questions from the chat into a question and answer period that really brings even more light to the subjects that we discuss. Thank you to our sponsors we named at the beginning of the program, and I also put into the chat right now. We welcome your feedback on the webinar. A feedback link is in the chat and will be included in the email that goes out to everyone with a video from today's program. Please join us for part 2 of this series, Sunday, April 6th at 11 a.m. Eastern, for the Song of the Sea as the Liturgy of the Exodus. As I noted, this is a series, and so your registration counts for both, so no need to register again for the second program. So we look forward to seeing everyone in about a month. And finally, wish everyone Simchat Purim. Wonderful, happy, and joyous Purim. May the story of Purim have reflection in our day and find salvation and protection for the future of the Jewish community, and especially to everyone in the land of Israel.